People, I've got voices talking in my head. I'm just used to it now.
It's for the garden.
Yeah. Good evening and welcome to a special streaming edition of KOMU8 News. We are partnering with the Columbia Missourian and Midwest studios to bring you a forum between candidates in the race for Columbia's mayor. We want to welcome all of our viewers who are watching this stream on our various platforms. And of course, the election is on its way. It's just a few short weeks coming up in April. So let's meet the candidates running for mayor. In alphabetical order, we're going to begin with Barbara Buffalo. Hi, Barbara. She's spent 11 years as Columbia's sustainability manager, and she stepped down in May of last year. Barbara, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Emily. Nice to be here.
Next up is Tanya Heath, who is currently an adjunct instructor for strategic communications at the Missouri School of Journalism and health and wellness business owner. Tanya, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Randy Minshew is a former 6th Ward City Council candidate. Serves on the board of directors for the Phoenix Programs. That's an addiction recovery center here in Columbia. Also the vice president for business development for Deline Holdings. Thank you. I can't even read my own writing. Randy, thank you for being here tonight. And last but certainly not least, David Seaman is joining us this evening, currently a Columbia School Board member and a member of the U.S. Marine Corps. David, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for your service. And of course, thank you also again to our viewers for being here. And here's how our forum will work. I'll be asking a question to all of the candidates, and you all will have 30 seconds to respond and give your answers. If there's any debate, keep in mind we might have some rebuttals, but those should also be kept to 30 seconds as well. And we'll have the final say on when to move on to the next topic. And let's get started. Our first question will begin with Barbara. So what makes Columbia special to you, and how would you work to make sure that that value is cherished?
Thank you. This is a great question because I do believe Columbia is special, and I think it's the people. I think it's the people that make Columbia special, whether or not it's students in our Columbia Public Schools, or University of Missouri students, or those of us who have come here for college like myself and stayed and love things like True False Film Festival, Roots and Blues, and just having that culture of community. I think that's what makes us special. And I think also the Midwestern support that we have, you get to see day to day.
Okay, Barbara, thank you. Tanya.
Well, I was born and raised in Columbia, and I have really enjoyed growing up here. My husband and I have raised our daughter here, and I think that, you know, between 4-H clubs and sporting events, there is something for everyone in Columbia to enjoy. And then if you look at just the diversity that we have. We have people from all over the world that work here and live here. And so I think, to make it special going forward, I think we have had a huge amount of growth.
Okay, Tanya, thank you. Randy.
Well, we lived here in 1994. We raised 4 children here of our own. We raised 3 of another family member, so we put 7 kids through Rockbridge. I think it's the amenities, the parks, the trails, the events that happen. It's a true college town. It's a college town in the Midwest, so it's automatically a fun place to be because of that. We get our students move in every year, and we get all of the good things that brings to us. So it's really kind of hard to match what we have here.
Thanks, Randy. David, what about for you?
I think it's the people who make this place, who make this city special. I've been on the receiving end of that special generosity that we provide as a former teen parent, as somebody who lost their father just a few months before that. The only reason I'm able to sit here as a school board member and as a mayoral candidate is because of the generosity and specialness of the people of Columbia. So I would say it's the folks here.
Okay. Thank you all. Moving on to our second question, we're going to begin this one with Tanya. The City of Columbia has a history of supporting nonprofits that serve the needs of the homeless. Recently, there has been activism in support of more direct city support, such as a homeless resource center, use of city buildings for overnight warming centers, and additional staff. So what do you say is the appropriate role for the city regarding the homeless population?
Yes, so I have had a focus group as well as talked to individuals in the city about the balance, because Columbia is a very compassionate place, and yet the ARPA money could help so many water mains and electricity needs and all sorts of stuff for the whole city. So I think what we need is a private-public partnership where we have the city providing basic things and the private to come in to supplement.
Okay, thank you. Randy.
Well, we've had Wabash Station on the news quite a bit for the warming center. And I think the housing need for that particular group of people, it's a very small group of people, is one thing. But I also think we need to be looking at what those individual people need, because we know some of those people, they could have emotional, mental disease issues. They don't have insurance to get their medicine. So I think we really need to focus in individually on each one of those. It's not a cohort of people that are moving through time together. They all have their own story.
Okay, Randy, thank you. David.
Yeah, so the city's responsibility is to coordinate that public-private partnership. We have a responsibility to use our ARPA funding in the way that it was designed, in the way that Pat Fowler and Ian Thomas put forth in their resolution, a resolution that I supported. Randy talked about a Wabash warming station. We have a responsibility to ensure that it is open when it is 32 degrees outside, open when it is needed as a cooling center, and that we are protecting our citizens.
Okay. Barbara.
Yes. So you mentioned the coalition of people and the history of supporting nonprofits. And so the City of Columbia is that convener of these groups. Now we have the benefit right now of having some of the America Recovery Plan Act funding coming through, which is rare to get a shot of money to do something. So with that, we can help do the seed funding for a center, but that center will be operated by these social services groups coming together that provide the needs for those community members that are experiencing homelessness on the spectrum of housing issues that they're having.
Okay. Moving on to our third question now, and Randy will begin this round with you. Attention on crime in our city frequently focuses on the downtown district, especially late at night when incidents occur. What is your understanding of the crime situation in our community, and how would you address it? How does the concept of community policing fit into your approach to crime prevention?
Well, I think the community policing is a good idea. I think the crime that we see downtown a lot of times starts someplace else. It doesn't start in downtown, it ends up in downtown. I think we have a responsibility to our downtown district to make sure that area is safe, but I also think that's true of all the other areas of town. You can't do any of that without enough police officers. So we have to restaff, we have to increase the staff, the numbers of police officers we have.
Okay, David.
So as Randy said, crime doesn't typically start downtown. It actually comes from the outer rim of the city, where it has been taking place in these neighborhoods for decades, and it just seems to have been forgotten about. The way you solve that crime and prevent it from traveling downtown is through reducing poverty, ensuring that folks have adequate housing. Community policing would be a large portion of the solution, but as mayor, I would want to hold our police department responsible for decreasing our traffic stops and building, or decreasing the disparity of traffic stops and building a commitment toward our public.
Okay, David. Barbara?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember, community policing just means good policing practices, right? So that means that you're able to respond when somebody needs help, but that you're also making sure that you're responding with adequately, appropriately. So not everybody is having it's a crime that needs to be responded to. Some are mental health crises that are happening. But when you talk about downtown crime, it's true that some of these are issues happening elsewhere. And so things that they're working on right now is by resourcing the people that help respond as well as the police officers so they know how to respond.
Okay, Tanya?
So, as you know, we are short police officers, so we need to get the police officers up. The other thing we need to do is we need to increase our lighting downtown. We also need to increase our awareness in the neighborhoods as far as, making sure cars are locked at night, and also we need to make sure that we are doing campaigns against drug use, because a lot of this is stemming from drug use and it spills over into arguments.
Okay. Our fourth question, we'll begin with David on this one. Some in our community see zoning rules as promoting growth over preservation of affordable housing and abandonment of downtown. What do you see as the appropriate approach as Columbia continues to grow?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the last comment, affordable housing is going to be key to helping reduce poverty, helping to reduce violent crime. So I think all options should be on the table in increasing our affordable housing stock, whether that is zoning overlays for affordable housing, reducing parking requirements, reducing development fees, and actually going as far as having a conversation on completely eliminating R1 zoning.
Okay. Barbara?
Yeah, so I talk about this, from my experience at the city. One of the things we thought about was you don't want to limit growth, because growth is development, economic development for the town. And we need housing, obviously. We're in a housing shortage right now. But at the same time, you want to intentionally grow, right? And so you want to think about, where are we putting houses? Where do people need to be? So intentional infill is a theory where you think about those spaces that are in infrastructure existing, so that you're not adding on too much for the way the city has to take care of that, and making sure you're siting it appropriately where people are.
Okay. Tanya?
So you think back to how Columbia used to be, and we used to have trailer homes, we used to have reasonable rent for people, and we used to have growth that we could manage. We have grown 37,000 since 2000, and I believe that we have not kept up with talking to the people who would have the best answers. So why don't we have the builders and the people that are in tight economic situations at the table, along with the city and community leaders, so that we can come up with a plan of what kind of housing they would like.
Okay. Randy?
When the city put the Unified Development Code into place in 2017, the restriction on housing started, and we see that today. So you'll never get affordable housing when you limit the number of houses that we have. I think the government's role, the city government's role, is to make sure when we see where a neighborhood's going to go, that we make sure we have schools, fire stations, that the roads are right for that. The growth would take care of itself. I think we just need to partner with those developers to make sure that we have enough housing, because right now we have a housing shortage.
Sure. Okay, let's talk trash here for a second.
Oh my gosh.
Barbara, this is going to come back to you here to begin.
So many memories.
Trash collection seems to be an ongoing issue for our city. It seems like we're unable to come up with a solution that serves and pleases the majority of the folks that live here. So from roll carts to recycling, what would your approach be to combat this issue?
Yeah. So I think, right. So I think the history of this, obviously I have the most experience probably sitting up here with this, because I was one of the ones who looked at that data. What is that data telling us? And the whole reason came up because we had 79% employee turnover. We We had $350,000 on average in workman's comp, and our recycling was pitifully low, lower than Jefferson City. So we needed a solution. And staff came to City Council and said, hey, here are some options we could do. And Council decided not to act. And where we are right now in the situation we have is years of inaction. So staff right now is trying to provide a service within the rules that they've been given. And so I think we're going to have to readdress those issues when Mayor going back to council or staff and saying, what are the options right now? Where are the issues we're experiencing? And what solutions do you have? Because I think it's going to be a hybrid approach where we think about both roll carts as potentially bags, because some situations, some neighborhoods can't do both.
Okay. Tanya.
So I talked to our neighbors and I asked them in different neighborhoods what they thought about roll carts versus bags, because they have already voted twice now that they would like bags. And what they said is that they've either come from other cities that had roll carts and that the roll carts weren't cleaned out, and then that it attracted raccoons and bugs and all sorts of stuff, or it was a problem rolling down the street, or it was a problem in the snow when it was on the street instead of their yard, and all kinds of challenges like that. And so I thought about it and I thought, why don't we have the inside of Columbia trash bags? And then as we develop on the outside, those could be roll carts only. We could also do 10 extra trash bags for birthdays, holidays, and any other situation parties that people need. We could also look at different neighborhoods if they're insistent that they do a roll cart, and that they could choose to do that.
Okay. Randy, what do you think the solution is?
So there's an inherent problem with a municipality trying to run utilities, because utilities are like small businesses in a municipality, which the City of Columbia's government is. So there's some inherent problems, and it causes these delays in action. We talked to the trash workers, the solid waste folks on Saturday. They have answers to what they suggested that the city do. They were not heard. So first thing I would do if I become mayor is I would ask that we pause the bag rationing, limit 5 bags to each homeowner, and then study the city and see if there's not a hybrid system where you could put roll carts and bags. But the first thing I would do is get rid of the bag mandate.
Okay. David.
Yeah, so Barbara touched on the history of this issue. So I won't go back into that, but I think the solution has to ensure that we are protecting our sanitation workers and allowing them to unionize, that the new process is efficient, and that it is limiting the amount of trash that is going into our landfill. And I believe in that instance that roll carts are the solution. And that'll be roll carts that are different sizes for different homes and different structures of neighborhoods, and will allow for exceptions for our neighbors who are disabled and our seniors. I know that other cities have done this before. We talk a lot about not having to reinvent the wheel. Lawrence, Kansas has been doing this for almost a decade. And I do not remember a time when Columbia allowed Jayhawks to outcompete them. So if Lawrence, Kansas can do this, I firmly believe that Columbia can do it as well.
There you go. All right, so we've upped the time limit. You probably noticed on the screen. We're giving you a minute to elaborate more on your thoughts. 30 seconds just wasn't enough. So we're going to expand that to 1 minute. All right, Tanya, this question will start with you. To date, the city leaders have made no firm decisions on how to spend federal ARPA funds for COVID relief. We've heard you guys talk a little bit about those funds already tonight. So beyond them establishing some 4 categories for that $12.5 million of funding and a public engagement process for the remaining $12.5 million, if elected, what would you vote to do with the ARPA funds?
Yes, if I were elected mayor, I would definitely listen to the people, because we have 125,000 residents who have needs, and it's tax dollars coming back to us to make our city better for everyone. And so I think what we need to really do is look at the infrastructure. Again, the water pipes, the electricity. I was in a neighborhood where they had a machine that was digging up the front yard because a water main had broken. And when we went down the street, the neighbor down the street said that his had been broken the month before. And so our older neighborhoods are more than 50 years old. And so we need to look at water and electricity, and we need to figure out ways to help everyone, and especially the neighborhoods that don't have good sidewalks. I mean, there's some serious things that we could do to help our underserved neighborhoods. And then we can use the private to help with the other situations.
Okay, Randy.
Well, the ARPA funds have some restrictions on them, of what they can be used on. There were a couple of projects that were brought to the city. One of them is this crisis center that Burrell and Phoenix have been working together on. And so if someone had a crisis, if the police had someone who was in crisis, they could take them to that crisis center, and instead of taking them to the hospital or to jail. And so I think that would help us with some of our crime issues, because they could get the professional help they needed. They would be put into sort of this continuum of help. There are other projects that were brought forward that I think we need to look at. I think we definitely need to look at funding some kind of service, additional funding for our homeless folks, the ones that are in that crisis there. But we have so many good nonprofit organizations in town, United Way, the Phoenix programs, Burrell, that have come forward and said we could use these funds, and I think that's where they need to go.
Okay, David, what do you think?
Yeah, so I supported Pat Fowler, Pat Fowler and Ian Thomas's resolution assuring that we spent 100% of ARPA funds on addressing the inequities that were laid bare during the pandemic. And I still support it, even though it failed. Two things that I would like to see that money spent on are a permanent centralized shelter for the unhoused and a 24-hour behavioral crisis center, with the idea that in the future we place smaller satellite centers and campuses around the city, so that our folks don't having to come within this, or having to find transportation to get to the center within the city. I'm much more interested in the public engagement process. I want to ensure that it is diverse, that it is democratic, and that it is public, and that we are involving a robust number of citizens in our city, and not just the same folks who come to city council meetings.
Okay. Now that we have a little bit more time.
Wait, I don't think I've gone.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Barbara.
I don't know even. We've answered this question. I feel like everything. I might have gone. I don't know him.
I'm so sorry. You're right. We did start with Tanya for this one. So
Yeah.
how would you spend the ARPA funds?
Well, right. It's like what you said. Well, part of it, right. So City Council, when they first were aware of it, and also a reminder, we do not get a big shot of money influx into our town very often. And so this is something where it's really able to, for the city to look at where have we been unfunding things or not being able to resource or adequately. And so with that, I think it's those things like our the workforce development programs that they've been working on with the Moberly Area Community College and other partners in town. I think it's looking at those pieces like our the homelessness shelter, the Voluntary Action Center and Columbia Housing Authority, Love Columbia, and others are putting together to help our unsheltered homeless. And I think it's that behavioral crisis center. But more than that, I think it's this asking the public what they want, and then also asking the city staff what they need. Because right now we've been underfunding our infrastructure for years. When I worked for the city, we had stimulus funds in 2010 and were able to make energy efficiency improvements that resulted in over $200,000 a year in savings. And I think we can continue those projects.
Okay, Barbara, thank you. Now that we have a little bit more time for responses, I'd love to kind of circle back and talk a little bit more about the downtown crime. It was kind of a two-parter question, and I know there was a lot to cover there. So starting this time with Randy, I'd like to come back to you and see, a lot of you mentioned to increasing, that we need more police officers, which obviously we got to be able to pay for more police officers. So use this, this time here to either elaborate on the previous question, or if your main response was we need more officers, how are we going to fund more police officers? Randy?
Well, so I wanted to go back to one thing on the ARPA funds, because part of what the request was for our public safety, for the fire and the police officers for the 2 years that were spent during the COVID crisis. And so I think we should allot part of that money back to those public servants who served us during that crazy pandemic time. Hopefully we're past it. As far as downtown goes, I think we've got to put some police on the street. I think we need to add cameras. You know, the university is our #1 employer, and their customer is students, and those students are in downtown. So we are a college town, and we have to embrace that. So we've got to make downtown safe, along with all of the other neighborhoods, but specifically for downtown. And the funding for the police, the funding is in the budget. We changed their retirement plan and made it not so attractive to be on our police force, and so I think we need to adjust that so that we can attract those police officers back.
Okay. David.
Yeah, so at any point in time in the city, if you're out and about, there are only 14 police officers on patrol. And for a city of this size, that number is incredibly low. It doesn't help police a city of almost 130,000 people. My concern, obviously as a black man, is the number of traffic stops, the disparate number of traffic stops that our own Attorney General here continues to see an annual report saying that you are pulling over black drivers, specifically in downtown and East Campus, at a much higher rate than anyone else. Black drivers make up 3% of the drivers in downtown Columbia. They make up 27% of the traffic stops. So ensuring that we are rectifying that is a prerequisite for me before hiring any more officers. I can't add further officers into a department where this is the culture. And I also want to ensure that we are committed to rebuilding that trust within our communities.
Okay, David. Barbara.
Yeah, so, well, I first want to comment quick on something that Randy said. When thinking about the ARPA funds for public safety, I think we should also open it up. We had a lot of frontline employees that were working through the pandemic that need the support. Like, I think of our trash workers as one of the first ones I think of, and our bus drivers also were operating during the pandemic. So I do not want to limit that, and they're not the only ones. But when we talk about police officers, right, so if you're so understaffed, right, short 40 officers right now, that means that they're working 12-hour shifts. And then we're asking them to also go through training, which we want them to go. We want them to be all crisis intervention training so they can respond to people with the needs that are being met right there. But they're having to do that like on their days off. They're having to do that to take away time from their families. So I want to make sure that we're adequately staffing, that we have enough police officers so they're not having to work those long shifts. And I think one of the roles of the mayor is to help with that recruitment and maybe think of how we can grow our own so people can see, a young child can see themselves as a police officer and want to work with the department when they grow up.
Okay. Tanya.
So yes, we are understaffed with police officers, so we definitely need to continue to recruit and hire and get to full staff. Another thing I would do as mayor is I would look at cities that have 200,000 or greater, and I would find out how they are helping their communities be safe. And so my husband and I were recently in Nashville, and you've heard of, the social workers supplementing the police officers and stuff like that. So we were walking on one of the main streets in Broadway on Nashville, and there was a person that probably had something, and we don't know if it was a knife or what, but the social worker came up, two of them, and talked to that person for a while. And we asked one of the bouncers, we were like, what happens? And they go, they talk to them, and then they call the police. And so I just think we need to really look at what we can do before people get to that crisis moment.
Okay. And Randy, I want to give you an opportunity to respond because Barbara mentioned your answer about the ARPA funds. So
Right.
a quick
Yeah,
response.
and I agree with that 100% because we had people who work for us, who work for the city, who did yeoman's work, and so we definitely want to do that. I will say that we're never going to attract the police officers back to our police force. We used to be the police force in the Midwest to work for, and we changed the retirement from 20 to 25 when the 2008 crisis hit with the national funding or economic crisis, and we haven't changed that back. So we've got some structural problems within their retirement plan to make it attractive to get those folks back. And I would say the same thing is true with the trash workers and with our bus drivers. Their pay structure needs to be looked at. We're not going to get those people to come to work for the dollars that we're paying.
Okay. I believe this question goes to Randy next. Okay.
I think it's David.
David? Okay, thank you. I've been bouncing around a little bit here. Okay, next question, beginning with David. Why are you running for office and why should members of our community vote for you?
Yeah, so I think I touched on it earlier about when I talked about just how special this city is. As a 17-year-old at Rockbridge High School, my father passed away from cancer. 2 months later, my then girlfriend, now wife, told me she was pregnant, and I started my senior year of high school. And like I said, the only reason that I am sitting in this chair as a mayoral candidate, as a Columbia Public Schools board member, is because of the people of this city. They picked me up and they carried me forward until I could get back on my feet. And I was able to go to Columbia College and finish, join the Marine Corps as an officer. When it was time for me to get out, my wife and I decided that we wanted to bring our family back to Columbia because this is where we got our start. The city is special to us. Having now served on the Board of Education and seen the promise that we have offered our students and our staff, I want to ensure that that promise is expanded to everyone in the city, that we all have an opportunity to prosper.
Okay, thanks, David. Barbara, what about for you?
Yeah, so I love where I live. I love this town. I love Columbia. So I came here in '98 for college and fell in love with this town and just wanted to stay. So my husband and I are raising our 2 little buffaloes here and working over the last, decade with the city of Columbia, before that with MU Extension, and then obviously within the university system. I just have a great love and appreciation for this town. And for that 17 years of public service, I've also built relationships within our community and our town where I can help us actually achieve the problems that we need to fix. I'm sorry, not achieve problems. I can fix the problems, or at least work on it. And I think that's important. As we're starting over right now, we're going to have a new mayor. We have a new city manager. We have a new department directors. We're going to have some new council members. And I think that experience of knowing how the city works and where there's opportunities for improvement are going to be very key in the success of our next council. And so that's why I think I'm the best for the job.
Okay. Tanya, what about for you?
Well, as someone who was born and raised here, I had a vision of how we would be at this point when I graduated in '87 from Hickman High School. And this past summer, I had a conversation with a garbage collector about how that they were at half-staffed and how that people were yelling at them because of the garbage policy. And I just thought, what is going on? And so I am running because I am representing the regular person in Columbia who looks around and they see that, students are bussed all the way out to battle. Their parents can't pick them up till midnight after practice. And it's not the neighbor to neighbor treatment that I had envisioned when I was growing up as far as where we would be as a city now. And I just think that we can do better, and I think that part of doing better is talking to the end user of all the decisions and making sure that they are on board and happy with those decisions.
Okay. Randy.
Thank you. The 40 years of being in business, raising kids, working now that I work for a large organization, the leadership skills that I have, the ability to look at what I see now with the city and see that some people are confused on the difference between management and leadership. The role of the mayor is to be the chief ambassador for an awesome town in the Midwest that we all call home. And seeing that role, seeing the role that the city manager has, and understanding the role between the city manager and the city council, I believe my leadership skills would give me the strongest chance of running that council the way it should be. And I love Columbia. I think I see, because of my unique involvement with the homeless and with the addiction community, I think I see a side of things that a lot of people haven't seen, and see some answers to some of those critical issues.
Okay. Barbara, for this question, right? I think okay.
You got this, Emily.
Next question, we're going to talk a little bit about the transit service in our community. Yeah. It's frequently criticized for reduced hours that the buses run and some limited routes as well that are offered. Many in the community have advocated for a more diverse transit system. What is your position on this for our city?
Yeah, so transit is key, right? People need to get to the places that they need to go, whether or not that's work, the doctor's office, or their home, or their kids' school. So when I worked for the city, we were analyzing where were people riding, where were they going from. And the limitation has always been also the lack of drivers. And so when you have a lack of drivers, it's harder for you to have extended hours or more bus routes. And so first I want to make sure that we're looking at what is the pay of that position so that we're adequately providing a living wage so we recruit more people to be drivers. And then also how we develop is impacting our transit system. So we need to think about how can we highlight things like transit-oriented development, where if we have a little bit more density on some of our busy thoroughfares, that provides more people to then be riders. And then you can think about building out neighborhoods from there. So we need to be thinking about how we're building, how we're staffing, and then also what's our goal. We want people from the university and others to ride on this bus so that they park their car and help with our transportation emissions.
Okay, thank you. Tanya.
So I would do a study where we can figure out who is riding the bus the most. And I would send more buses to that area because I found out, and I mean, I would just scream if I was one of the people riding a bus because it takes them an hour to 2 hours to get to work. So you think about 4 hours a day that someone's having to give up time riding a bus to get to work. That disrupts their family life, that disrupts their marriages, that disrupts their friendships. They don't have time in their normal life to have a quality life in Columbia, where in a car you can drive 20 minutes and pretty much get wherever you need to be. So I would make sure that the buses go to the high need areas, and then I would also look at our church, Community United Methodist Church, has a bicycle program, and so other churches and other mosques and synagogues could also do programs to help provide transportation to all of the people that need it.
Randy, what are your thoughts on the transit system?
Well, I think we ought to examine the idea of moving the bus service outside of the city purview and moving it over to economic development like the airport is. Because we don't involve the university in ridership on our buses. If we had a program where we could, and this was looked at a few years ago and it kind of fell down, I think because the bus system's not under the right, in order for that to work, we'd have to put it in economic development and see it as a benefit to our students. I think the routes that we run right now need to be looked at again. I've talked to people who say you have to walk 30 minutes to get to the bus. So I think we need to look at it more from a value to our community economically, and especially because of students. And then, we put in Swift Meets is building out on Route B. We need to have a bus that goes out to 3M and to Swift. We need to have that system in place. Those are shift workers. That's the perfect people to be riding the bus.
David, your thoughts?
Yeah, so Randy made a great point to start out there, is that we have the airport under the Department of Economic Development because we view our airport as a potential job creator or job attractor. Our transit system currently sits under the Department of Public Works, where we are working on filling our potholes. It shows the priority level of where we believe our transit system is. And as someone who has spent their career in logistics and operations, the way our transit system is built or set up for ridership is troubling. I've ridden the bus a couple times over the last few months, and what we need, one, are shelters at every bus stop. We talk about having folks go to Wabash. Well, you can't even go sit at the bus stop without getting rained on most of the time. We want to ensure that our bus stops are in front of our community resources, all the community resources that we've talked about today, ensuring that the people who are headed there who do not have private transportation have the opportunity to go from one doorstep to the next without having to cross major streets.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, we'll start with Tanya. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit more about affordable housing, which I know some of you guys have addressed. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. The affordable housing available in our community far outweighs the demand for it here, which is oftentimes seen as a root cause for the homelessness that we're seeing. How would you address that problem?
Yes, so I think we should have the people that do the whole thing. Like I said, the builders, we should have real estate people, we should have city people, we should have people that, are on a very tight budget, and we should have them all at the table. Because I think it's one of those things that we could totally solve, but the problem is there's some sort of hesitation about building smaller houses in an area that would allow for people to successfully become a homeowner in a way that would build their family's wealth. And so we can solve this, but we just need to get everybody in the same room and talk about it. Because when we have everybody being able to afford a home and doing well with their family, it makes our community stronger. We all benefit from that. Another thing we could do temporarily is they can refurbish school buses for $22,000. You could have tiny houses. We could also do trailer parks again, just to start out.
Thank you. Randy?
Would you do me a big favor and ask that question over again?
Absolutely. Affordable housing demands far outstrip the availability that we have in our community, which is often seen as a root cause for the homelessness that we're seeing as an issue here. So how would you address this problem, the affordable housing?
Well, first of all, I wanted to back up. The idea of moving the bus system outside of the public works and over to economic development is an idea that our friend Maria Warapalo, who's not running anymore, came up with. So I just want to give full credit where that's due, because I think that's a great idea. The housing issue, you know, when I bought my first house, I bought a first-time homebuyer type house, smaller. If you look at our situation right now, we don't have first-time homebuyer houses because the first-time homebuyers are not moving out into their second time. And so the government doesn't necessarily need to solve all of that. It's sort of a natural process that maybe a little less government would help. And so I think we need to go back and look at the Unified Development Code. I think we've got a few things in there that need to be tweaked. Right now, it makes no sense that we don't have the inventory because of we knew this was coming. We knew the demand was coming, and we've squeezed the development and the possibility for building more homes. So I think we need to back out a little bit and let the builders take care of that.
Okay. David, what are your
So
thoughts?
in having conversations with CHA, we need about 400 new affordable housing units to meet demand. If you think about the cost of that, that's about $60 million. So having a funding source for that type of development over the next few years is going to be key, and it's going to take, once again, that robust public conversation about how do we do this? There is no real right answer, or there's no answer that everyone's going to agree upon. So once again, we're talking about a priority. What are our priorities in this community? Further doing that, we need to, like I said, we have to focus on infill development in existing neighborhoods. We need to cut developer fees, which are only about $6,900 per house, but that's still a component of the issue. Moving forward, we got to look at everything from, eliminating R1 zoning, providing new subsidies for housing. As Randy said, there really aren't too many more affordable one-bedroom and $150,000 starter homes in this city, and that's an issue.
Okay. Barbara.
Yeah, so, I think it's important. Housing is a spectrum, right? So when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about everything from, a center for transitional housing for those with experiencing housing instability, to affordable rental units, right? Making sure that you have units where people can rent and they can afford to be there, to having affordable housing for that first-time home buyer and then that second-time home buyer. And as I think about those things, I think about this idea of what the city can do, right? So one of the things that the Columbia Housing Authority, the City of Columbia, and the Columbia Boone, Board of Realtors partnered on a few years ago is this idea around middle housing. This idea about thinking about these intentional infills or small multifamilies that can go in that also are within the community character. So neighborhood's not going to say, oh gosh, because they don't want a huge apartment complex to come in the middle of a neighborhood, but they do want to have more neighbors, and that adds to the diversity and the culture of that community. So the city can help by incentivizing that. We can make sure that our zoning supports it, and then we can make sure that the infrastructure is there and that it's up to date so that they can build.
Okay. I have a follow-up question just from hearing you guys all have a lot of great ideas for ways to make our city better. And obviously, kind of what I brought up with the need for more police officers, we got to be able to pay for these police officers. So when you're talking through some of these ideas, whether it's more affordable housing or more buses to other places, where are we going to get the money? Have you thought through how are we going to work on adjusting our city budget to really fix some of these problems that we have great ideas for, but are we realistically going to be able to pay for these things? And I believe, Randy, it's your turn to start.
Well, so I will give a plug for the for the tax that we're going to vote on, the Wayfair tax. So that will put money right into the general fund, which is where these dollars could come from. The city coffers are full right now. The city estimates how much sales tax, how much tax they'll collect. We've undershot what we've collected by somewhere close to $8 million over the last few years. So the money is there. The other thing is, within your household, the money goes to the things you think are important. And so if the pie is a certain size, it depends on how you cut it up. You cannot cut the pie up and leave out public safety. You just can't do it. I mean, we have to make our town safe. So it's a matter of what you fund, and you have to, and so where you put your money tells everyone around you what you think is important. If you're the mayor, if you're the city council, the city manager, where that money goes speaks to what you think is important.
Okay. David, what do you think?
So Randy once again said something that I was going to say, and I think you're going to hear from a lot of us, is it's about priorities. Well, how are we prioritizing the funding that we already have? And you're correct, you will need new funding for, like I said, 400 new affordable housing units, a long-term plan of potentially hiring dozens more officers, because that is not single year funding. You have to be able to pay them each year. So then it comes down to how willing is our community to introduce the new sales taxes or things like that. We have the appetite for it. And that's where that robust public discussion is going to have to come into play. And we want to hear from the citizens, because what you don't want to do is put a new tax on the ballot saying, hey, we're going to use this to fund new affordable housing or fund new police officers, and then it fails. And now we have to go back to the community and figure out what we're going to do about it. So having that robust conversation amongst a diverse group of citizens is going to be key.
Barbara.
Yeah. So I think with the funding, when we talk about for housing, for like affordable housing, right? The city doesn't build any. Like, we don't do that. I mean, obviously we are a channel by which federal funds come through from housing and urban development. So we do have some programs of which we will help with aiding with that. And those funds actually can go for offsetting some development fees. Now, they can't go to a developer, but they can go towards the city to offset some of those fees. And I think if we ask the staff, and if you ask those volunteers on planning and zoning, our Housing Development Commission, these smart people that are dedicating their jobs to this and their lives to this, they're going to come up with a idea of where we could use this and where we could have the help. And then also, obviously, the use tax coming up, April 5th, is the opportunity to basically just create a level playing field for our local businesses. By voting yes on it, it means that if you buy online, you have to pay a sales tax, but you should have been doing it anyway. And I think that's something that will come into our general fund that will help in our planning department that helps with affordable housing.
Okay. Tanya, what do you think?
Yes, so everyone has been talking about the Wayfair tax, and what was shocking to learn, I think, for all of us, was that it's not only something that Columbia has not been paying, but it's like so many other states and so many other cities have been paying the internet tax for so long. And so their cities have been able to benefit from that. And if we pass that, then our city will be able to benefit from that. I also think that, when you look at a budget, you need to go item by item to just really see if the money's being used the right way. And I would also say that sometimes it's a good idea to talk to the employees and ask them where they think they could save money. For instance, Barbara referenced about the over 300,000 went to, physical injury to workers. At all the schools, they have physical therapists. And so why couldn't we hire a physical therapist to help with police, trash, bus, everybody that has a physical type of job, so that we don't have the workers' comp that we used to have?
Okay, thank you. Moving back to our next question here on my list. David, I believe we began this round with you. There were complaints last year about the lack of transparency in the search for a new city manager. How should council keep the public informed when conducting searches for important city positions? And how would you have kept the public informed had you been on the council at the time?
Yeah, so just prior to that search, the Board of Education actually went through the process of hiring our own administrator, Dr. Yearwood, and replacing Dr. Stiepelman. So what we did was we actually mirrored the process that City Council had used in previous years. We ensured that the public was aware of our priorities and who we were going, what we were looking for. We kept them abreast of the number of candidates that we had interviewed, when those candidates would be interviewed. We had planned on actually bringing in 2 finalists. We actually decided that we wanted to have 3 finalists to give the public the opportunity to see exactly who it was we brought in. And even in the middle of a pandemic, we were able to somehow provide a robust schedule so that each of those candidates was able to go visit different elected officials, different advocacy groups, the universities, so that they could get a feel of what they were coming into and the public could see who they were. We then held an interview session just like this in the boardroom, and we then made a decision. So I would suggest that City Council in the future use their own processes, use their past processes.
Okay, Barbara, what do you think?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of working for the city when we went through 2 of the hiring processes, and it was great. And one of the things that was really helped with that trust, because what you're mentioning is that the public had a lack of trust in the city government and city council, which when they have that lack of trust, then that will bleed into other parts, right? So what we used to do, was advertise it, and then we would have the finalists come in and give presentations. But they did more than that. They also met with city department leaders, city staff, so that city staff could give their input to city council on how the working relationship felt. And what that did was both ensure that that person was set up for success within the organization itself, but it showed the public, like, really, this is who this person is that the council is bringing in. And I think what we saw last fall, it was disappointing. You know, I wasn't with the city anymore, so I could only be a Facebook commenter on some of these things. But I think what it did was it set up DeCarlin Seawood on an uphill battle, because now he has to prove that he's worthy of this, which felt like a secret process.
Okay, Tanya, what do you think?
So I would have talked to the different residents in different parts of the city, and I would have asked them what they are looking for in a city manager. I would also have talked to all the employees in a survey and then in focus groups to get their input as far as who they need as a leader for guiding the future of our city. And then I would have talked to business leaders, and I would have talked to our nonprofits, and I would have said, okay, here are the challenges coming up and what type of city manager do we need. And then I would have brought the person in, like we've pretty much said, brought several people in and had them interviewed. And so we could stream it, we could have them, live, all sorts of stuff. And I just think that I agree with Barbara that, the way that they did it, it made everybody instantly unsure. And there's so much that he is going to be good at doing. And I just wish him the best, and I wish we would do a better job, for him and others in the future.
Okay, thank you. Randy, your thoughts?
Well, having had an opportunity to visit with Mr. Seawood, I think he's the right choice. I think from a philosophical standpoint, having worked in private industry, I've never worked for a city, I've never been on city government, I have a different view of this. If the city government ever assumes that the public should trust them, we're off on the wrong foot. There's a mandate to transparency. You should never say, "Oh, I'm surprised that the citizens didn't trust us while we did this in secret." I mean, I don't understand why anybody would be surprised for that. I don't think the city should have told us who they were interviewing, but that they were in the process or how many people were in the process. I think we absolutely deserve to know that. So you just have to make a vow of transparency. If you're a city government, you have to be transparent.
Okay, Randy, thank you. Next question, this is something that, David, you had brought up a little bit on earlier. Going to expand on this. We're talking about the disparity in police stops here in Columbia, and also the use of no-knock warrants for searching homes. What is your position on these 2 practices that are seen as targeting Black members of our community? And Barbara, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, so the racial disparities in police stops is something that obviously is not unique to Columbia, but Columbia can respond adequately for what we need to do here. So right now, I know that our police officers going through training is adequate so that they can make sure that they are, I was going to say even before they go through training, our hiring practices making sure that we're really robustly evaluating people that are applying to be on the police department so that we're keeping out some of those biases that are creating these disparities in our numbers. That's going to be key. And I think part of that is the recruitment, right? How are we doing the recruitment to then do the hiring processes? The other thing is holding accountable. You know, for the longest time, we had some of those reports coming out, but we weren't necessarily getting the data. We were not having council discussion with it. It was just something that was going to the state and we weren't really talking about. And then I think supporting then the good officers, like those who are responding adequately and in our values of our community policing, and celebrating those as the model of what we want to see in community policing.
Okay. Tanya, what do you think?
Okay, so definitely training is a key component to any sort of important change that we want to do, so that way people are getting the type of law enforcement that's necessary to keep everyone safe, as well as the respectful law enforcement that I know that Chief Jones wants to have on his police force. I also have heard, though, that the officers are working 12-hour shifts. And so if you think about how exhausted they are and how they've got all this equipment on them, and then they're having to go to the trainings, I think, you know, like squeezing them in and stuff like that. I think we need to have a better system for how they are trained and when they are trained, and that way they can absorb the information, and then in real time, when their adrenaline is going, they will be able to make the right decisions. And as far as the no-knock warrant thing, I think that is tough, because if drugs are involved, it's really hard.
Okay. Randy?
So I think one of the things that happens in Columbia is we read things in the media. They put out things about no-knock warrants and things that happen in bigger cities or other towns. We haven't had a no-knock warrant served in 13 years in Columbia, and yet it's a topic of our discussion tonight. It doesn't happen in Columbia. So everyone has the right to make an accusation or to put something forward about the police department, but you're not automatically given the right to be right about it. So the accusations can be made. There's actually no spokesperson for the police department to go, wait a minute, you're off, you're wrong, because the accusations just fly. And so, you know, I have grandchildren, I have black grandchildren. I don't want to see anybody of any color treated unfairly. So it has nothing to do with that from my vantage point. It's a matter of, do we have these issues in Columbia? And if we don't, that proves that we're training our police officers right. It means we're hiring the right guys. Those things are being played out right in front of us.
Okay. David?
I'm going to ask that you repeat the question.
Sure. Residents have complained about the disparity in police stops of automobiles and the use of no-knock warrants for searching homes. What is your position on these two practices that are seen as targeting black members of our community?
So we've talked a lot about the importance of downtown here in Columbia and its importance to us, and how our college students are kind of the lifeblood of the city almost. As a black driver, I feel as though I have just as much right to be downtown and in the East Campus as anyone else. And like I said, as our Attorney General Eric Schmidt continues to tell the city of Columbia, is David Seaman and people who look like him have a very valid reason to be concerned when they travel downtown. So that is a cultural issue, that is a training issue, that is a policy issue. And those three things begin at the top of the department. I would be incredibly willing to work with Chief Jones and DeCarlin Seawood and anyone else to try to help solve those issues. I can't verify the information that Randy mentioned about no-knock warrants, so I'm just going to make a general statement in that in a country that prides itself on having a Second Amendment right, no-knock warrants seem to fly in the face of that and put officers and civilians in danger.
Okay. We've reached just beyond the 5-minute point left in tonight's forum. So to kind of round out the evening, I would love to give you guys just a chance to speak about what you hope voters walk away with tonight when it comes to giving you their vote. And if we can reset the clock to 30 seconds, because we don't have time for each to give a full minute response. So if you could give me a 30-second response to why, what you hope voters take away about your platform.
Yes, so my name is Tanya Smith, for mayor.com, and I would say that
would also like to say that I represent the regular person, and people vote, not money. People vote, not money.
Okay. Randy.
Well, you can find out more about me at minshewformayor.com. I think what I bring to the table is common sense. I think I bring, 64 years of wisdom that's been gained over beating my head against the wall on certain things. My pledge is to make it a safer, stronger Columbia. I think we've got to increase our police department. We need to make sure we've got enough fire stations to go in the new neighborhoods that we've got. We've got to increase the number of firefighters to man those stations. And then we need to restructure. We need to look at the way city council leads as opposed to manages.
Okay. Thank you. David.
So my name is David Seaman. You can find more information about me at seamanformayor.com and on Facebook at David Seaman. I hope that you would look at me as someone who has very real governing experience over the last 2 years throughout a challenging, once-in-a-century pandemic, and as someone who has been in a system of government that very clearly mirrors that of our city council and manager roles.
Okay, thanks, David. Barbara.
Thanks, Emily. So Barbara, Buffalo. I feel like I should say buffaloformayor.com, just so everyone else has. I hope that they will choose me because I have the experience to do the job. Working in city government for the last 11 years, I've had the opportunity to work with all departments at the city, as well as our community partners and regional partners. And having that knowledge and also the relationships and the personality and sense of the set of skills that I have will help us be unified in a government that is working for the people and has a clear vision for the future.
Okay, Barbara, thank you. Barbara, Tanya, Randy, David, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
it was lovely
Emily.
spending an hour. You can take a deep breath.
Right.
We made it through an hour answering all of our questions, and we really appreciate it. We'll have another forum for all of you folks listening in coming up on Thursday at 7, where we'll talk to the City Council candidates, also that you'll see on your ballot in April. So on behalf of KOMU8 News, the Columbia Missourian and Vidwest studios, and we thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on KOMU8 News tonight at 10, or you can check our website, komu.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening.